Well, good evening. You guys ready to go? Okay, welcome back to class. We have 3 weeks left tonight, 2 weeks to follow, and we'll see how much we can get done. For right now, let's take 2 minutes. Everybody stand, stretch, look around the room, say hi to somebody, and maybe meet somebody you don't know. I'm going to get my computer hooked up, and we'll hit the ground running.
This is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice as we lift His name. This is the day that the Lord has made. Come and rejoice. We will rejoice and be glad in it.
All right, come on back down to your spot, and let's talk through some announcements, and I really want to jump right into the material tonight. So welcome back to class. If you're joining us online, welcome, and I'm sure there'll be some folks straggling in here over the next few minutes. Although, tonight is really nice, isn't it? Yes, it is. I mean, we should be having class outside right now. Like, let's just go sit in the sun, and oh my goodness, today was great. Okay. This Sunday is Celebration Sunday. So, number one, if you've never been baptized, would like to be, there's still time. But I think we have 14 people that are going to be baptized on Sunday. So you pray for them, pray for their families and friends that come to hear them, pray for the presentation of the gospel. We're in Revelation 20 this week, which is, it's good and bad. It's the millennial kingdom and the great white throne judgment in the same message. So you pray for Sunday. Then we have a biblical prophecy seminar with Don Forrester. He will also be speaking on Sunday. You guys will love Dr. Forrester. June 1st and 2nd, so it's a couple weeks from now. That's on a Saturday, and we'll enjoy that if you're available. So class, we have 3 weeks of class left. Then we have a break on a Wednesday night, midweek. There will be nothing. But then June the 19th, we have a Lord's Table service. So I hope you'll mark that down, and then we basically hit the ground running with our summer quarter of classes moving into September. Church picnic. I feel the energy in the room already. June 23rd, we moved it up a little bit, so 2 things. Mark that in your mind. That's a really fun day. That'll be now the day we actually start the series on the family. We're going to Churchill Park again. Our church is about to outgrow that whole space, but we barbecue, grill hamburgers and hot dogs. You don't even have to bring anything except yourself. We just load the whole space up with a lot of fun and activities and fellowship, so it's a really great time. It's honestly one of the, I'm trying to think, it's one of the only times we come together fully, like both morning services together in one space. Nights of worship and stuff like that. But anyway, it's a great time. So that's June 23rd. The Kids Summer Blast, some other things coming forward. Volunteer parking team, if you'd like to help make people angry out on the parking lot every Sunday, we would love to. I'm the worst at this kind of stuff. Anyway, we're building that team. We'd love to have your help. You enjoying the new driveway? I actually watched 3 lanes of cars, 1 coming in and 2 leaving the other day, Sunday. So we're going to get it striped and all that, hopefully this week, and it'll be even more clear. But thank the Lord for that. Okay, let me see if I've covered everything here. Let me talk about some prayer requests and ask you to pray for some things in particular. So you've got the prayer page. I'm not going to go through all of that for sake of time. I will tell you that I have heard from Dale Martin. Dale had surgery, a pretty serious surgery on Monday, and he told me today he's expecting to go home tomorrow. And so continue to pray for Dale. He's one of our deacons. Then I want you to maybe jot some things down, and particularly just high end, ask you to pray for. This is the time of year that we are really diving deeply into really 3 budgets. We worked yesterday till my head was spinning on finalizing all the church details of the budget, and then the school budget. We started a first draft and we worked through that, and then we pretty much finalized the missions budget as well, coming into July 1st. So I hope you'll pray for us in that regard. And the budget involves all kinds of, like 1,000 other decisions, and the staff contributes to that, and then the finance team. But it's always a heavy thing because I'm reminded that, we're stewarding so many of the gifts of God's people, and we want to be careful, we want to be wise, we want to be right, we want to take care of our staff. There's so many implications to it all. So you just pray for that process. We will have that budget available mid-June. I think Father's Day is when we make it available online, and we'll have a couple weeks. Secondly, along with that budget, we are really working to fill some staff positions, church and school, and enlisting new deacons as well. So in the next few weeks, you'll be meeting new deacons, and then probably July and August, I'll be introducing some staff transitions on the church and in the school, and it's all really good. It's all because of growth and development, but we're shifting, we're growing into the growth, and it's all really good stuff. But pray for all that's in motion, and that God would just give us wisdom. It's more wonderful and bigger than I ever imagined it would be, but we just need that much more wisdom. And I get nervous about all this stuff because I don't, I want it to work right for you and for all the people involved. So just want it to be a blessing. So I would really appreciate your prayers in all of that kind of stuff. And when we do introduce those that are going to be serving as new deacons and new staff, and those that are transitioning to other roles on staff, I hope you'll just really encourage them, because they'll be coming in with fear and trepidation and, am I going to be able to do this well and all that. So we all have our own insecurities. So if you would take those things to prayer, not only tonight, but also in the coming days and weeks, I would be very, very grateful. So let's do this. Let's take the next 5 minutes and just go to prayer. It is 7:10, okay? So I'm going to close this at 7:15, and you take some of these needs to the Lord, and let's ask Him to bless our time together. You go ahead and pray, and then I will close this in 5 minutes. I'll pray in about 30 seconds. Lord, we love you. Thank you for bringing us together tonight, and thank you for this time we've been able to spend over these weeks just understanding the geography and the storyline as it plays out on the land of Israel and the surrounding areas. And I pray that this has filled in some blanks and helped us to connect some dots, and that you will continue to use this information in our understanding of your word and your redemptive story. And guide my words and help me to be an encouragement. Help us to enjoy tonight and to make the most of it. And we thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, how was last week? Do you guys remember what sites you guys covered? I did not. I should have asked Lance what sites you guys covered. Gethsemane? Okay, good. Did he take you to the Mount Beatitudes? Okay, so you saw the pictures of Mount Beatitudes, which is right by. Did he show you on Google Earth where this stuff is? Okay, all right. Is it just those two, or were there other sites? Okay, those two. All right, good. So we are going to finish the life of Jesus and move into the book of Acts a little bit tonight, and probably be a little bit all over the place because you know how that goes. I'm a little ADD. And if you're doing the one-year Bible journey with us right now, you're reading about the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom in the Old Testament, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And so if you basically went about 30 miles north of Jerusalem, where Bethel is, and just kind of draw a line, you can look at this at the maps in the back of your Bible too, but draw a line right there. Judah is to the south, it's all this area, and then Israel, the northern kingdom as it's known, is all this area up here. And the capital city in Samaria is right in there, so Jezebel and Ahab's palace, and the palace of so many of the kings we're reading about. They also had a palace in Jezreel, which is over in here in the valley of Jezreel. We're reading this week in the one-year Bible journey about the Syrian army fighting the northern kingdom, and then the northern kingdom kings reach out to the Assyrians way up here, farther in the north in Nineveh, and then they end up coming down and defeating the northern Galilee area, and then they end up coming down and destroying the entire northern kingdom. So same land, Old Testament, New Testament. You really have to layer it by era. We've been focused mostly on the life of Jesus. So we left off last week, if I'm remembering right, still up in Capernaum. Jesus was finishing his 2-year, give or take, his 2-year ministry in Galilee. It's also called Galilee of the Gentiles. The east side of the lake was all Gentile region, Decapolis, 10 Greco-Roman cities. The west side of the lake was all Jewish, and this was the major intersection coming down from really the known world, the trade routes coming into this area and then down into Africa and Arabia. So Jesus home-based right here in Capernaum for a couple of years. Last week we left off with him doing the feeding of the 5,000 up in the hills near Bethsaida, and then the storm on the lake, right across the top part of the lake, and coming back with the disciples to Capernaum, going into the synagogue in Capernaum. And I think I showed you some of these photos, but this is the synagogue where Jesus gives the lecture, John 6, about being the bread of life, and everybody walks away, and he looks at the disciples and said, are you also going to go away? So at this point, they've kind of rejected him. He pronounces judgment at one point on Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum. And that's that triangle of cities that I was showing you on this map. So I'll use the hand. Capernaum, Chorazin, Bethsaida. And there's the triangle. Chorazin's way up in the hills. I think that's the last thing I showed you was the ruins of Chorazin and the trail coming down the hill. So at this point, let me go, if I can, let me just open a note on my computer. Jesus is going to basically leave Galilee, and going forward, he's only going to basically pass through it one or two more times and not really do any more ministry there. He's going to minister again in Judea and do a campaign of gospel, one final gospel campaign coming back down through Judea to Jerusalem as he goes into Jerusalem to die and to face the crucifixion. I'm looking for this note that I am trying to find. Journeys, there it is, okay. Well, that's not good. Okay. Hold on. I'm missing it. Here it is. Okay. So, 2.5 years Galilee. All right. After this account in John 6, where everybody walks away and leaves, he goes to Caesarea Philippi. Okay, there's two Caesareas. We're going to talk about both of them tonight. So let me show you on Google Earth where we're going. We're going to journey north up this ravine. This Jordan River comes downhill out of the north. Once you get up to there's a valley up here that's pretty wide. It's a little bit like the Valley of Jezreel. A lot of farmland. You keep journeying north. There's a ridge line right here of hills, and then there's hills right here. So these are the Golan Heights. This is actually the hills of Lebanon. And so Israel owns this, occupies this little narrow strip. They still occupy all this. Israel occupies this. Syria used to have this. But all the way to the north is the city of Dan. Let me pull out of this a little further. And this is the peak of Mount Hermon. It's a huge mountain right here in this region. So let me just try to tilt this map. Okay. So as you're coming up this valley, okay, these are hills, so I'm going to get back in the valley here. All right. I don't know if you can tell that, but you can see the farmland is the valley, and then the hills descend down on each side. See if I can make that even a little more obvious. Whoa. This is like all or nothing, isn't it? Forgive me if I'm making you sick. Dana would be saying, please stop. Well, it's zooming me in and I don't want it to. Okay. So, all right. This is the base of Mount Hermon. You can see this ravine coming down in the foothills here, and it opens out into this valley. So the headwaters of the Jordan River are right in this area. In fact, you can't see it from where you're seated, but right where the red hand is, the words on the map say, Tel Dan Nature Preserve or Reserve. Tel means city. Dan is the name of the city. This city in the Old Testament, before the tribe of Dan went up to conquer it, was called Laish. It was just a peaceable group of people minding their own business. The tribe of Dan, which had a spot down south to the west of Jerusalem, didn't like their spot, so they just came out of here for no good reason, moved north, wiped out everybody in the city, and took over. And so this has been forever since then known as the city of Dan. It's where the Jordan River starts. It is a really cool site to go to this day. It's a mound. This spot right here is the ancient city. And you can stand at the northern part and literally look, over a mile or two into Lebanon. And this city, this is a really interesting city because half of it is in Israel, half of it's in Lebanon. But you can still see the military just, armaments and the trenches and stuff where they were, entrenched here against the Syrian border. So this site, just a little bit uphill and around the bend, you come to this site right here, which is Caesarea Philippi. I'm going to make sure I've got my bearings right. It's showing me all these words in Hebrew. Okay, yeah, it's right down here against that's Hermon Nature Reserve. Here it is, right here. Okay. Caesarea Philippi was a Roman city right here at this juncture because this is the ravine that cuts over into Syria and the road to Damascus. So, road to Damascus, who do you think of? Paul. Okay, we'll come back to that. But the road to Damascus would have come out of Jerusalem, over the hills, up the Jordan River Valley, all the way up the northern Galilee, and then it would cut over this ridge, the Golan Heights, right here before you get up onto the ridge of Mount Hermon. So I just want to zoom out and show you where the peak, you can see this mountain climbing up, and half of this mountain is in Israel, and the other half, part of it's in Syria, part of it's in Lebanon. But there's ski resorts up on the peak, and it's a huge mountain. So from down here, from Dan, you're climbing very steeply up into the hill. But right here at the base is this city, Caesarea Philippi, and this ancient pagan site of worship called the Gates of Hell. Okay, so the ancient ruins of the city and Herod's palace is right here. And then right inside this wooded area built into this hillside, and you can see the cliffs here where the red hand is. These are very steep cliffs, and built into this cliff is a cave and a worship site that was referred to in Jesus' day as the Gates of Hell. So let me go to that spot. Here we go. All right. So this is the drive going up through that valley into the northern Galilee. So where I'm standing is the ruins of a city called Hazor, or Hazor, H-A-Z-O-R. This goes all the way back to the Old Testament. And I'm looking straight north, and you can see the foothills to the left, and you can see the hills off to the right in this valley that goes right up through the center. And you can't see it because of the haze, but Mount Hermon, the peak of it would be off up above the arrow there. So it's a wide, fertile valley. When I was talking in Revelation Sunday about the birds migrating down through, this is one of the areas where they had a lot of trouble with that. Same shot, just okay. These are ruins of Hazor, which goes back to Joshua conquering the land and burning the city, and they've excavated and they've found actually the remnants of the ash and the burning of the city, and these remains are excavations go way back to thousands of years before Jesus, and when this was a Canaanite city. But it became an outpost city, kind of a garrison and a fortified city for Israel, guarding the northern border and enemies coming down from the north. I always play out the invasion of the northern kingdom because this picture, there would have been some lookout posts. If I go back to Google Earth and zoom out of this, the Assyrians would have come down into this valley, and they would have come south and Hazor is going to be like right around in here somewhere. So you can see this is the tip of the Sea of Galilee right here, and then you climb, and you emerge into this valley about right here, and this was a city that's right here looking north, and I always think, wow, so the red hand is where I'm standing in that photo, and looking north, I'm thinking they could have seen that Assyrian army. In one moment, it's 185,000 soldiers in chariots and horses coming down that valley, and what a dust cloud and a threat and a source of, fright that would have been, that here they come. So just to play that out is worth thinking about for a few minutes. Okay, let's go back to this site. Let's keep pressing through. Hazor. This is the headwaters of the Jordan River at Dan, where the waters basically come out of the mountain. This is some of the farmland. This is some of the ruins at Tel Dan. You can see the stone. These are the walls of the city. And this is a high place. This is the altar outside of the entrance to the city of Dan, where they made their offerings as they came into the gates of the city. And their gods, their idols, would have been sitting up on top of this platform. And these ancient stone walls, and they go all the way back to the period of Joshua and even before. So this is the gate of the city. And you don't think of modern day gates this way, but the gates of the city were narrow, and then you would walk in and go one way, and then you'd go this way, and then you'd go this way, and then you'd come back, and then you'd go into the city. And the reason is, when they're getting invaded, they wanted it to be really tough to get into this city. So they've got fortified walls, they've got guards on the walls, and then they've got this narrow entrance and usually an uphill climb into the gate of the city. And then you kind of go through this little maze like a keyhole, and boom, then you get into the city. This area right here is, if you remember reading in the Old Testament or portions of Scripture where a man would sit in the gates of the city, or the Proverbs 31 woman, her husband sits in the gates. This is a place of governing, it's a place of prominence, a place where commerce, and basically the governor or the leader of the city would sit there at certain times of the day, and it was kind of like the court of appeals, if you will, in terms of governing the cities. So this is all remnants at Dan, not so much pertaining to the life of Christ, but it's still interesting to see. Again, we're jumping back to Old Testament. This is the altar at Dan. So if you've been doing the one-year Bible journey, we read not too long ago, the kingdom split after Solomon. And you've got Rehoboam, Solomon's son, who inherits the southern kingdom for a short time. Jeroboam is the man from the north that says, if you don't lighten up, we're going to break away and have our own kingdom, which they did. God said to Jeroboam, if you'll be faithful, I'll give you a long lineage and I'll bless your kingdom and I'll take care of you. Jeroboam got into power and immediately took the nation into paganism, and the northern kingdom never came out of it. They never had a good king. The very first thing he did was he set up a pagan worship site at Bethel, which is 30 miles north of Jerusalem, and then all the way north here in Dan, all the way to the northern part of the city, he set up another altar and a pagan temple. And this is a metal frame of where that altar would have been. And then right up on the stairs behind it, right up here, which is off the picture, would have been the actual temple. And they've excavated all this, and it's, okay, so there's another shot of it. So you can see where the altar would have been, and then up those stairs and the temple. And Jeroboam made 2 golden calves and put one in Bethel and one in Dan. Primarily because he was an insecure leader and did not want the people of his kingdom going to Jerusalem to worship, because that was in the southern kingdom. So it was really just a bad decision all the way around. Okay, this is still from Dan looking north into Lebanon, and this is that city in Lebanon that I told you is half and half. So this is looking right across the kind of the DMZ zone, if you will, into the Lebanon border, which is like a mile or 2 away. This is some of the remnants of the military outpost that was there. So now we're looking at the foothills of Hermon. Hermon would be off to the left, but you can see the Golan Heights and the hills and how steeply they rise. This is a gate in the city of Dan that they discovered. It is an ancient mud brick gate. The door has been filled in, but you can see the steps that went into the city, and you can see the archway where there was a door going into the oldest version of the city of Dan or Laish. Here's what's interesting about that gate, is it dates back to the time of Abraham. And if you remember the story of Abraham, Lot gets taken captive by the kings of the north out of Sodom and Gomorrah with a bunch of people from Sodom and Gomorrah and a bunch of stuff. And the raiders take them north, and Abraham finds out, and he gets his men, arms all of his men and servants, and they chase them all the way to Dan. And they overtake them at Dan, and then they chase them out towards Damascus, get all the stuff back, bring it back south. And the king of Sodom wants to reward Abraham for his service, but mainly he was trying to save Lot's life. The interesting thing about that gate is that would have been the gate of the city when Abraham showed up at Dan. So when you're looking at that photo, it's just, that's the steps he walked up, and that's the gate he would have entered the city. Okay, so now we're at the other site. We're at the pagan worship site at the base of Mount Hermon, okay? You can see these cliffs that I was referring to on the map. Let me go back to the map for just a second. And we are right here. Okay. So this picture that I'm going to show you is looking at this face right here, this cliff face. So you can get a sense of the scale of that cliff. And the water comes down out of this preserve and out of this hills. This cave right here, I'm going to show you some more shots. You can see the carvings in the rock. They had built their temples right into the mountain. And this cave was considered a portal to the underworld. There's a backstory to this. Genesis 6. I'm going to get a little bit into the fringe, okay? Genesis 6 gives us this sparse account of, it says the sons of God came down and cohabitated with the daughters of men. You ever read that passage and been a little perplexed by it? There's really two explanations for that. There's the one that everybody's comfortable with, and there's the one that kind of like, ooh. It's kind of like when we hear about UFOs. We don't know what to do with all that information, so the world just ignores it all. You know, there's this account of Genesis 6 that's a little disturbing to us. Here's the idea that as I've studied it, especially the last year or two, that I've come to believe is the true story. We know that Satan wants to corrupt God's creation. We know that from the beginning he wanted to destroy it all. And the fall in Genesis 2 and 3 is the main fall. But Genesis 6 is a very significant event. And when you take it at face value, here's what it seems to be saying. It seems to be saying that fallen angels, there was a group of fallen angels that figured out a way to hack human DNA. And, previous generations had a hard time understanding that, but in the day in which we live, that's not a very far-fetched idea. Anybody ever heard of the technology called CRISPR? DNA editing. Just look it up. I mean, it's pretty scary what we can do with just splicing DNA and the stuff we can grow and the things it's like Frankenstein kind of stuff, okay? So, it would make sense that angelic beings, fallen angelic beings, would have access to some of that knowledge, and that they figured out how to take their DNA and human DNA and blend it. And that seems to be what happened in Genesis 6. An incursion of fallen satanic, demonic angels that figured out a way to hybrid humans and supernatural angelic DNA, and used the human daughters to do that. The idea is that is what led to Nephilim, the giants, and that is what necessitated the flood, is that these hybrid human beings were not God's original design, and that Satan was really trying to wipe out God's creation and take over with a totally different race of beings. And that would justify, by the way, have you ever wondered, why did God flood everything out? That would certainly justify the flood. And then you get to the book of Joshua, and there's like a remnant of giants, and God says, genocide, wipe it all out, wipe them all out. And that, again, that would be justified if you're talking about a corrupt kind of DNA. You say, Pastor, why do you think there's a substance to this? The main reason is that Peter and Jude refer to this. And they talk about the angels that sinned being reserved in chains for judgment. And when Peter and Jude say that, they're quoting an extra biblical account called the Book of Enoch. And when they quote the Book of Enoch, they're quoting that story. So I would not say that we should look at the Book of Enoch as Scripture, because God did not work it into the canon of Scripture. But clearly, the fact that God allowed Jude and Peter to quote that story in their New Testament letters at least validates that truly these angels did some sort of egregious sin to humanity. That, here's the thing, there are lots of demons, fallen angels, operating on the planet today. We know that. But these, referred to in Peter and Jude, these specific angels are reserved in chains. In what we're going to talk about Sunday, the abyss. The Bible calls it hell, Sheol, the grave, Gehenna. All these concepts that we think of as hell is this underworld place where these angels are being held. And we think of it in two iterations. The first is the rich man in torments being in hell, okay, Luke 16. But then we also think of Lazarus in Abraham's bosom. So after death, pre-heaven, pre-new kingdom, all that, where those who die in the Lord are now. Okay, that's probably TMI. But my point is, the story of the angelic incursion and the hybrid humanity traces back to Mount Hermon. Enoch's account says that these angels came down at Mount Hermon, and that's where they made a pact to corrupt the human race. So from way back in Old Testament literature, and especially Second Temple period was post-exile when they came back from Babylon up through the life of Jesus, okay? The writings of that period and the belief of that period, which would have been the disciples, they saw this spot going all the way back as a supernatural place of corruption and a portal to the other world, to the spirit world, okay? And that narrative would trace back to this story of this angelic incursion in Genesis 6, okay? So from that point forward, this becomes this mystical place of pagan worship where every generation there's gods that are worshiped there and temples that are being built there. So whether it's the Greeks or the Assyrians or the Syrians or the Romans, it's always a place of supernatural worship because they believe it to be supernatural. So this is where the story really gets interesting. Jesus takes his disciples here at a moment where everybody's walking away and they're starting to get discouraged because, remember, they're thinking this movement is going to grow and the Messiah is going to set up his kingdom, but he doesn't do that. And not only is it not growing, he's offending everybody and they're all walking away. So the disciples are starting to get perplexed and what's going on here? And so Jesus takes them away, takes them to this spot and sits them down somewhere in proximity to this spot. Because when he says the gates of hell shall not prevail, he's referencing this, okay? And it gets even thicker. Hang on with me. This is really cool. This one kind of blows my mind. He sits them down and he tells them about following him. He tells them about discipleship. He tells them they have to lose their lives, their suke, their inner sense of self, their identities to him, and they will find their lives. He basically tells them we're right on schedule. This is about a spiritual kingdom that's going to one day become a material, physical kingdom, but it's not happening the way you think it's going to happen. This is when he starts to talk about his death, that he's going to go and suffer and die and resurrect, and he's going to go away. They don't get it all. They don't even want to hear it. It's almost like he says it, but they ignore it. But he tells them at this point, I'm going to build my church. He starts to, for the first time, give them real inside information about the plan. And you say, well, why didn't they know from the beginning? Little conjecture here, but you got to remember, Satan doesn't know all of God's plan. Remember how he tells the demons, don't say who I am? And he's very restrictive about the messaging. He's very deliberate about the timetable because there's a very specific timetable to it. There's a very specific plan to it. And Satan doesn't know the whole plan. But at this moment, Jesus has walked into Satan's territory, okay, this mountain. Like Jerusalem and Temple Mount is the city of God and the place of God, this would be like Satan's place, okay? And so he goes to Satan's place and he says to the apostles, I'm gonna build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail. And there's two senses of that. The first is that this dominion, this spirit realm, these fallen beings, Satan and his kingdom will not prevail against the kingdom that I'm building and establishing through my church. The other sense of it, which you've heard me say, gates are a defensive measure, which means the church is on the offense. The church is attacking the gates of hell. It's not that hell is coming against the church, it's that the church is on the offense. Satan is crushing the head of the serpent. Jesus is crushing the head of the serpent. Jesus is on the offense. Satan is on the defense. And by the way, we need to remember that for our lives, because sometimes we get under the spiritual battle of it and we feel like we're under assault, and really we need to turn that around. And what does Peter say? Resist the devil and he will what? Flee. The answer is we got to get back on offense. As soon as we get back on offense in the name of Christ, under the blood of Christ, the church is a force to be reckoned with. So, hope this comes back on. Okay, yeah, my computer just wanted to go to sleep. Okay. So, let me just show you some more pictures. Back to my story though. Jesus says, hey, this dominion is going down. Isn't this cool how we get to see this picture as we're studying Revelation? Because the kingdom does fall ultimately and finally in Revelation. But this moment is critical in the storyline, number one, for preparing the disciples of what's going to happen. Because he gives them this information they don't want to hear right now, and they don't even know how to assimilate it all. But in 6 or 8 months, it's all going to lock in. And these fearful, trepidatious, backwoods fishermen are going to become gospel ninjas. All of a sudden, they're fearless. They're preaching the gospel in Jerusalem. They're in prison, threat of death. They're just setting the world on fire. And before that, they're cowards. What changed? The resurrection, the power of the Spirit of God. The most fearful, cowardly, weak people, all of a sudden, all this information locked in after the resurrection of Jesus. And I want to sidebar and tell you this. Sometimes God gives us information, and we can't process it all. We can't put it all together. But he wants to put it in us. And then down the road, a week or a month or a year, a circumstance or a situation, and the Spirit of God brings it back, and we're like, and we know what to do, and we know how to process because of the information he gave us. And remember what he said? He said, I'm going to send my comforter, and he's going to remind you of all the things that I've taught you, okay? So many times in my life, it's like, God, why are you teaching me this right now? Why are you showing? Why is this happening right now? And then down the road, I can see God, this is why. It all starts to make sense. That's what's happening with the disciples. He's putting the information in them. But right after this event, by the way, he says to them at that time, there are some sitting here that won't, I'm trying to remember the phrasing of it, Mike. Basically, you're going to see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Does he say they won't die? I'm trying to remember what he says. What's that? You will not taste death until you see the Son of Man. Okay, so he says there's some of you here that are going to see me coming in my kingdom. This is probably the question I get asked the most. Because there's a section break there and maybe a chapter break. The very next thing he does is he takes Peter, James, and John up into the mountain for what's called the transfiguration. You guys remember this story? So he takes them up, and a cloud, and Jesus appears radiant, like we see him in Revelation, or like Daniel and Ezekiel saw him. He appears, it's like the veil of his humanity is opened temporarily, and Elijah and Moses show up there and they talk with Jesus. It's almost like one of those things that's like, I don't understand that, so I'm not going to think about it. But here's literally what happens. Jesus takes off his costume, and for a moment the realms merge, and Moses and Elijah show up and they have a conversation with Jesus. They're just visiting like you and two friends having coffee at Starbucks. And the disciples are witnessing this, and they want to stay there, and they want to make little shelters, and they want to, and Jesus is like, no, guys, he gets them back on track. But that conversation is one I want to hear. Like, what did they talk about? But I'll tell you what some really good scholars that I respect surmise is that Jesus went to that spot and unveiled his true identity in its full glory for the sake of the enemy, to say, I'm here. And I'm not just a son or a created being. I am Yahweh in a human body. And there's a lot of thought that that's the moment that it was like Satan and his fallen angels realized it's Jesus drawing a line in the sand and saying, it's gonna go down. We're about to crush your head. I just think that's cool. That gives a whole new sense to the transfiguration, to what was really happening in that moment that's a little bit beyond us, but speaking into the spiritual realm, into the unseen realm, into the battle, the war that's going on in that realm. But when Jesus says, there's some here that won't taste death till you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom, that's the event that he's referring to. He's not talking about something in Revelation or something down the line. He's talking about, 2 or 3 days later when he goes up, 5 or whatever, he goes up into this mountain and that transfiguration happens. And they see the Son of Man as he is coming in his kingdom. Okay, so that's Caesarea Philippi. Let's look at some more pictures of this, all the same spot. It's sad to think, but this cavern, this hole in the mountain, this is where people cast their babies in pagan worship to Molech. And it's unthinkable, the things that happened on this mountain. This is an artist's rendering of what it would have looked like in Jesus' day, the temples built into the rock. This would have been a center of sexual fornication, temple prostitution, and all kinds of pagan ceremonies and blood and child sacrifice and terrible things. That's a little closer look at the hole, which is now filled. Some of the carvings that go back into the rock, you can see where they would have had idols. The foundations of the temples that are still there. And then this is a walk. Actually, that bridge is the road to Damascus. The road on top of that bridge is the road that Paul walked to go to Damascus. These are the remnants of the city of Caesarea Philippi and the palace of Herod. That's back at the mountain at the worship site. That's Herod's palace. You can see the hills go up, and Mount Hermon is over that ridge. It's even bigger than what you can see in the photograph. More of Herod's palace. And this is up in the Golan Heights looking back down into that valley. Okay, let me move on. And so that's a really important moment in the story of Jesus. It's up on that northern border. Okay. You guys stop me if you have any questions. At that point, Jesus, to shorten the story a little bit, he does go at one point up to Tyre and Sidon, which is up here. This is where he meets the Syrophoenician woman. I said on the video this week, the widow of Zarephath. That's because I was studying Elijah and Jesus at the same time. But Tyre and Sidon, so he goes up out of the borders. He goes one more time over to Decapolis. And now he's going to go south. At the very last few months of his ministry, he works his way back through Judea, preaching the gospel, and he ends up back over here in Bethabara, waiting. So when you get to the end of the Gospel of Luke, near the end of the Gospel of Luke, Jesus has come down to this side of the Jordan River. This is where he meets the rich young ruler who goes away sad. This is where he is called to come see Lazarus when Lazarus is dying and he doesn't go. So he's a day and a half or 2 days away from Jerusalem. Jerusalem's going to be, you have Bethabara, you have Jericho, and then you have Jerusalem right up over here. So he does not make that journey till after Lazarus dies. He goes and raises Lazarus, goes back, and he's waiting for that time of Passover. There's an account, I think it's in John, where he goes back into Jerusalem for Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, which is around Christmas time. And he goes back. He's waiting, and then at the right time, he makes his way back towards Jerusalem for Passover and for the crucifixion. When you're coming to this in the Gospels, he works his way through Jericho. He meets there two blind men. One of them's name is Bartimaeus. He heals the blind men. It's also in Jericho where he meets, you guys remember who was in the sycamore tree? Zacchaeus. I had a pastor one time who preached an entire message, the whole message, about the wee little man, Nicodemus, in the sycamore tree. And it was the funniest thing because the whole message, he's calling Zacchaeus Nicodemus, never caught it one time. He even sang the song, Nicodemus was a wee little man. He did the whole thing, and the congregation is laughing. We're all laughing. The teenagers were really laughing. I was a teenager at the time. And he thought he was just really funny. We were laughing at him, not with him. And so the more we laughed, the more animated he became, and the more excited he got about Nicodemus up in the sycamore tree. That's a funny story. So if I'm ever doing that and you're laughing at me, somebody stop me and deliver me from my misery, okay? It is easy to do. So Jesus comes up through Jericho, meets Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is saved. He has a meal with Jesus, and then Jesus makes his way up to Jerusalem. I've covered most of the sites at Jerusalem, so what I want to do just very quickly is talk about his last few days, last week or few days, and I'll just kind of highlight spots, okay? So I hope you're getting familiar with this scenery already. Again, by now you've seen it a lot. I should have a test, right? Okay, so this is the city. This is Temple Mount. The old city was about this space, and then you remember the city of David, that little piece right there, okay? And the city would have come out as it grew, and as in Jesus' lifetime, it came up this way, all right? This is the Mount of Olives. This is the peak of the Mount of Olives. So this is a slope down. This is the Kidron Valley. This valley is prominent all the way through the Bible. It's amazing. This is that steep slope up to Temple Mount. So you guys saw the Garden of Gethsemane last week and the straight sight line, a couple hundred yards to Temple Mount. So Jesus, when he comes into Jerusalem, he stays in Bethany, which is kind of over here. I think this is about where Bethany is. The tomb of Lazarus is somewhere over here. This is an Arab village today. But Bethany was here, so it was a short climb up the Mount of Olives and then a short climb down into the city. So the last week of his life, he comes to Bethany. Mary breaks the ointment over his feet while they're having dinner with, I think it's Simon the Pharisee that puts on the dinner. And it's that moment. And then he goes in. The first time he goes in, he just looks and he leaves. The next day he comes in and he clears it out like he did the first time. And then he sets up and he begins to teach, and he teaches through the day. And this is in the different gospel accounts. And then he goes back in the evening. In one of those evenings, as he's going back with his disciples, they're climbing the Mount of Olives, and they pause probably to catch their breath, and the sun is setting, and it's radiating off that sandstone mountainside, and the temple would have been glorious and beautiful, and they comment about how beautiful it is. And that's where Jesus gives Matthew 24, Luke, I think 21, what we call the Olivet Discourse. Olivet is just the Mount of Olives. Discourse is his sermon. And that's when he talks about the future. And that's where they say, what is the sign of these things? And what will be the sign of the end of the world and the sign of your coming? How do we know when it's all happening? And he talks to them about the end of the age and what all is going to transpire all the way down to his second coming. And he predicts initially that the temple will be destroyed and not one stone will be upon another. And then he continues to talk about all the things we think of, earthquakes and wars and rumors of wars, that whole passage. So that happens right here on the Mount of Olives. The last day, which would be Thursday, he sends his disciples to get a room ready for the Last Supper. And that's going to be up in here. let me look at this real quick. Up here, there's a hill right here that today is called Zion, and the proposed site for the upper room is up here. They get the room ready. Jesus comes into town, comes through town, up to this upper room, has the Last Supper, and then he walks. I don't know the route, if he came across town or if he went down to the valley and then up the valley, but somehow he would have worked his way over to this Kidron Valley and then worked his way up to Gethsemane. From there, he's arrested. Let me zoom into this just a little more. You guys okay? All right. So we can zoom into the city itself. All right. So at Gethsemane, he's arrested, and he's taken all the way back to Caiaphas' house, which is up in here. The wealthy religious leaders had the biggest homes and the largest mansions in town. And today there's a church there, but you can go down into the dungeons. And let me pull that. Have I shown you those photos yet? Let me get out of this. It's right above it. Okay, good question. Is Caiaphas' house in the Valley of Hinnom? I'll come back to the photos. Let me point out the valleys to you, okay? So, Kidron Valley, let me just make sure I get this right, comes down this way. And right here, there's a juncture. And the Hinnom Valley, Gehenna, okay, where they burn the trash, and in the Old Testament, where they sacrifice their children to false gods, to Molech, is this valley right here. And it hooks all the way up and around. And it comes, it's still a valley. It's actually, this is all, you can see the green here, it's all a park now. All this as you come up. I've walked this many times. And then actually there's a mall right here and a big beautiful hotel. And then the King David Hotel is right over here off the photo. But this is the Hinnom Valley, and you can kind of see on the map the shadow of the depths of the cliffs right here. That's a shadow. It's a cliff. It drops down. Okay, so the Kidron Valley comes down here to this juncture. The Hinnom Valley comes up and around, and there's a middle valley called the Tyropian Valley that is now filled in with construction, but it used to be right here. And this is just a side note that's interesting. This forms a Hebrew letter that looks like a W, okay? It comes down, and then it comes up here, and then over here. It's the Hebrew letter Shin, and it's an abbreviation for the name of God. And it's pretty cool because God said that he set his name in Jerusalem. And when you look at the topography, that's actually true. It's like you have shirts with a monogrammed initial or something. He just stamped his name right there with the letter Shin. But that's just interesting. That's about all there is to that. It's really interesting. Okay, so back to the life of Jesus. I'm running out of time. He gets brought over to Caiaphas' house and tried by Caiaphas and then the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish council. They don't have the authority to put him to death, but they've accused him of blasphemy and for claiming to be God. So now they're going to send him to Pilate. Now, I don't want to confuse you here, but there's two theories, and I'm going to tell you what both of them are. There's two possible places for the trying of Jesus with Pilate, and then there's two possible places for the crucifixion and the burial, the resurrection. So I'm going to talk you through both of them, okay? There was a Roman fortress right here called Antonia Fortress on the corner of Temple Mount, where there was a garrison of Roman soldiers here. For the longest time, the tradition has been that that's where Jesus was tried by Pilate. That's where the crowd yelled, "Crucify." That's where he was flogged, and ultimately where he was sent off to the crucifixion. So the Via Dolorosa, the Catholic, tradition of following that Stations of the Cross, comes out of here and comes down a road here and then turns and then comes up a road to right here, which you could see a little bit. This spot is called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. At the time of Jesus, the city walls were right here, and this was a quarry outside the city. So for a long time, this has been the traditional site of the crucifixion and resurrection. The thing about it, if you go to it today, there's no sense of that. It has just been lowered and devastated and constructed and reconstructed and torn down and reconstructed like 5 different times. So now it's a church that has like 5 different denominations that all claim ownership of a corner of the church. It's the most convoluted and confusing thing you've ever seen. It's also one of the most crowded spots in the entire city. I hate going there, to be honest with you. It's dark and oppressive and very full of religion and candles and superstition and people kissing rocks and stuff. It's really sad. But this would have been out of the city, and that's one theory, is that he was sent across here to Pilate, and then over here was Herod's palace. So this is up against the city walls. The Jaffa Gate, the road to Jaffa, is right here. And so Herod's palace is right here, and outside these walls are steps that went up to Herod's palace. So the other theory is that when Pilate came to town, he would not have stayed over here. He would have stayed down here at Herod's palace as a ruling, person, governor. So it could be that Jesus was brought from Caiaphas to Pilate or from Caiaphas to Pilate. You following? Okay. Pilate says, I don't want to deal with him, sends him to Herod. So it could be that he was sent from Pilate to Herod or from Pilate to Herod. Okay? It could have been sent across town, or he could have been sent right across the building to the other section. And there's strong opinions either way. It doesn't really matter. Okay. Then so he goes from Pilate to Herod, back to Pilate. Pilate finally condemns him. They put him on the march with the cross, carrying his cross, Simon of Cyrene. They get to the crucifixion site. They crucify him. Okay. Let me move the map a little bit. Okay. So I've given you both theories on the location of Pilate and Herod. Theory number 2, or the 2 theories on the crucifixion site, would be if Pilate was here, then Jesus would have been marched here to be crucified. If Pilate was here, he would have been marched this way. The site that I like of what we call Golgotha, or the crucifixion site, and the resurrection, the garden tomb, is up here. Okay, so you can see the proximity. The Damascus gate is right here. So the road to Damascus, leaving the city, comes out of this and goes out over the hills and then north. So the Damascus gate, and that gate today, this is the Arab section of the city. So this is, when you read about police officers being stabbed at Temple Mount, it's usually at an entrance along in here. And then when you read of a lot of the unrest and stuff, it happens at this Damascus gate. In fact, I remember seeing a year or two ago, they were throwing bottles and somebody got killed there, and I was like, wow, I've been in that gate like a dozen times. Because of the hotels we stay at usually are right off the map right up here. Really just like a 15-minute walk from the Garden Tomb. Anyway, Golgotha, this is a cliff, and then right around the other side of this cliff, this right here, this cliff face, right around this area is a garden, okay? It fits perfectly the description of what you read about in the Gospels. And so, it's 8:07. Can I take 5 more? Okay. I'm going to zoom you in, and then I'm going to show you some pictures. And then next week, we'll have to jump into the story of Acts. Okay. So today, I'm just trying to get my bearings here. I think the Damascus gate is either here, or I think it's right here. Anyway, this is an Arab community, all this area. And it's the strangest thing, because when you're over here, you can walk this, and when you're over here, you feel like you're in Israel. And as soon as you cross this intersection, you just feel like you just moved into a different country. It's the weirdest thing. But there's an Arab bus station right here. It is incredibly busy. But built into the rock above this bus station is the place of the skull. So I'm going to show you some pictures of that. And then back, a little trail back in through here, this is the garden, and the garden tomb is built into a hillside right here. It's hard to imagine it because it's so embedded into the built-up city. So I'm going to take you and show you some pictures now. Here we go. Ooh, where is it? Oh, by the way, these are the steps that go up to, this was the steps that go up to the entrance of Herod's palace on the city wall. All right, let me see if I can find I am so sorry. Maybe it's in here. No. I bet it's going to be here. Oh yeah, okay, here we go. So the view from Caiaphas' house, looking across the valley to Temple Mount, Mount of Olives, Kidron Valley, Gethsemane. So you get your sense of the topography. All right, let me scroll forward. These are the stairs that go down from Caiaphas' house. Those stairs give me chills because those are the stairs Jesus walked up when he was on trial. No doubt, 100%. And you can see the hillside going up. You can see actually the mosque up here on Temple Mount or Dome of the Rock. Same shot of the stairs, same shot of the stairs. So Caiaphas' house was built into this hillside. This is the dungeon under Caiaphas' house. This is the room where they believe Jesus would have been kept while they were debating what to do with him. And it's really it's an emotional space. The ropes are obviously not old, but the holes in the rock where they would have tied the prisoners up are still there. And it's just a very sobering thing. So this is a shot from the early 1900s of the place of the skull. This is the road to Damascus coming out of the city. Looking across at this hillside. The bus station is now right where this picture is looking. But you can see the eye sockets and the nose. So this is the skull. And the man that took this picture and the people that discovered this garden and this tomb, they call this Gordon's Calvary because his name was Gordon. So it's just a secondary theory as far as where this happened. So that hillside looks like that today. And so now we're obviously standing off to the side. The eye sockets were like here and the nose bridge has collapsed and you can see the bus station. So the idea, we sing the song, "On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross." It should be "At an Arab bus station far away stood an old..." And it really wouldn't have been on top of the hill. It would have been down where those buses are parked on the roadway because the Romans hung up the prisoners at that public spot where all the traffic was coming and going. So if you turn from there where I took that picture and you walk, goodness, I don't even know, maybe 150 yards. So I'm going to show you on the aerial map. That picture, I'm standing at a viewpoint like right here looking at this cliff with the buses below. And you walk this trail back here around this bend and you come into this beautiful garden area and this tomb built into this rock. So I'll show you pictures of that and then we'll be done for today. So again, that's the tomb. And you can see this is all bedrock. So that hasn't changed for thousands of years. Obviously, this was built up on top of it, and then there's homes and stuff up the hill. But when they were excavating this plot of ground, they found this tomb, and it's been modified over the centuries, but it dates back to first century in its original format or form, and it was a part of a garden, and in this garden they have found a wine press and some cisterns and some other things. So it's just an amazing spot. I got to sneak in there one morning before they were letting groups in. It's run by a Christian group out of England. Everybody that comes into that spot, and there's thousands and thousands of people every year that go there, they give the gospel to them. They talk you through the whole gospel as they give you the tour. It's really a cool experience. So this is the inside of that tomb. And this is a symbol of Christianity that dates back to the Byzantine church, which was like the 300s. And I think that's just interesting to me, that somebody in the 300s considered this to be a sacred Christian site. That's me and my buddy Larry. By the way, most of you, some of you don't know my son. That's my other son, Larry. That's my quiet son. So funny. A lot of people are like, don't you have another son? Okay. So that's the garden tomb. That's Jerusalem. Jesus resurrected 3 days, and that tomb is empty. And that's where we'll pause today. So when we pick it up, we got 2 more weeks. Next week we'll do Journeys of Paul. And then the last week I want to do the Exodus. I want to take you to Sinai and Arabia and show you some really cool things there. Okay. Any quick questions? Okay. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for what you suffered for us. Thank you that you went to the cross and you bled, and thank you that you rose again. Thank you that that tomb is empty. And I pray that as we look at these sites that we would just not only fill in the gaps academically and intellectually, but that we would let our hearts be more shaped by the gospel and by your truth, that your account of history is true and your promises are true. And as we see this Temple Mount, as we connect all the dots between the Old Testament and your first visit to earth, and we study Revelation about your return, and you'll set foot down on the Mount of Olives, and you'll come into that Temple Mount, and you'll set up your kingdom, as we'll talk about on Sunday. It's just wonderful to put visuals to all this, and we look forward to the fulfillment of your promises. So Lord, help that view to shape our lives today. Help us to live tomorrow and the next day in view of your promises and your truth, and where we're really going, and who we really are, and what kingdom we truly, eternally belong to. And we thank you for our time tonight, time together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, thanks for listening. Have a great night.